we are about to kick off the day's lineup with, in fact, proof that truth can, in fact, be stranger than fiction. And by that I mean we're about to hear from Clay Stranger from the Rocky Mountain Institute. And the reason that I make the kind of joke about truth stranger than fiction, because there is, what we have here today is proof that through the work of both Amory Levins and Clay Stranger, there's a terrific project going on, again, called the Reinventing Fire China. So it's basically how do you potentially provide all the energy needs of China in a way that doesn't create the kind of climate issues that we've all been talking about for several days. So there's some terrific work going on. Clay can explain it better than me about how to work together with China. There's a terrific partnership, and Clay's about to tell us about it.
Great, thanks everyone. And just to add to that, there's about 50 of us working on this Reinventing Fire China project. Some of my colleagues here have contributed a couple years of their time, energy, and effort towards it. And at 5:30 at the Limelight Hotel, we'll actually be hearing from Amory Levins and Mayua Cheng, who are two of the senior leaders of the project. And we'll discuss not just the findings that I'll describe now, but really the context in which these findings are operating. So thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation to speak this morning. My name is Clay Stranger, and I'm with the Rocky Mountain Institute. Couple of things just to set the stage. We really hit an inflection point as a species a couple of years ago when all of a sudden more humans lived in cities than didn't live in cities. There's about 7 billion of us on the planet now. By 2050, there'll be 10 billion of us. Nearly all of those additional 3 billion people will live in cities. 95% of them will live in the developing world. So the way that these new cities, to house these 3 billion people, feel, seem, act, operate, have a ton of implications for our common future. And so that's some of what I want to share with you guys today. So China and the US, many of you probably know, are responsible for about 45% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And really what's going to be required is leadership from both nations to tackle the problem. Without leadership from China, there really is no tractable pathway forward to solve this climate pickle that we've found ourselves in. Fossil fuels are the dominant source of the greenhouse gas emissions in China. They're also the primary source of an unfolding public health crisis and air pollution crisis. And the World Health Organization estimated in a recent study that 1.2 million people died prematurely in China in 2010 as a result of poor air quality. Others have tried to quantify the economic impact of air pollution, and it's kind of controversial. There's different ways of going about it, but people have estimated that somewhere between 3 and 13% of China's GDP was sacrificed that year in 2010 as a result of air pollution alone. That's not taking into account any of the water pollution or the soil pollution. So as a result, China's premier Li Keqiang recently declared a war on pollution, and President Xi has challenged the country to drive a revolution in the production and consumption of energy. They're taking this very seriously, and I think those statements kind of speak to that. And China really stands at a decisive energy crossroads right now. You know, the world's largest energy consumer, carbon emitter, and oil importer also leads the world in renewable energy generation and in carbon trading. Just last year, China installed 12 gigawatts of solar power, more than the United States has installed in the 60 years cumulatively since we invented the technology. So the speed, the scale, it's really unprecedented, and I think that really will be the bed of a lot of the solutions that we need to see rolled out across the developing world. And so China is the nexus of enormous challenges and also the fulcrum of equally impressive opportunities. So in November 2013, China's top leadership called for an ecological civilization, one where their economy, their environment, and their citizens could live in harmony and in balance. Reinventing Fire, we like to think, is the energy framework for that vision. And the senior author of a US book called Reinventing Fire, Amory Lovins, and a team of about 60 of us worked on that project in 2011, showing how the US could get completely off oil, coal, nuclear energy, using a third less natural gas, all at a profit by 2050. And 2 years ago, curious to see what a similar future would look like in China, 4 organizations came together to create that roadmap. And those organizations are China's Energy Research Institute, which is the leading think tank of their National Development and Reform Commission, sort of like a government lab or a research agency responsible for energy policy evaluation in China at the national level. The US is Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Energy Foundation China, and Rocky Mountain Institute. And since then, more than 50 of us have been working for 2 years to try to lay out what does a clean future look like for China's energy system, one where we can anticipate, plan for, and strategize and optimize around both energy efficiency and renewables for China. As a conservatism, our analysis assumes only normal and modest improvements to technology, and we used rigorous, cost-effective screens to make sure that any of the things we included in our model create economic value for China, as GDP growth is still central to their priorities. And we looked at all 4 sectors as we did in the US: buildings, transportation, industry, and electricity. So Reinventing Fire is a pathway for China to create a clean, connected, and secure energy future. And I'd like to share a little bit of the results with you guys. I would like to mention that we're in the final stages of vetting this analysis, so please don't cite the results publicly outside of this room. It'll be a little bit later this year when we're able to share them publicly, but I did have license from the team to share it with the group today. So let's take a look at what we found. The headline messages are that China could grow its GDP 6-fold over 2010 levels by 2050. They could do this using just a fraction more energy than they use today, decoupling their economic growth from their energy use. And over half of the energy required in 2050 could come from non-emitting sources. This, importantly, represents a 36% reduction in carbon levels by 2050 from 2010 levels. And all this can be achieved at a net benefit to the Chinese economy of about 22 trillion RMB, so a little less than $4 trillion, or as of this morning, a little bit less than that even. So the Reinventing Fire strategy really is, this applies in the United States, it applies in China, and it applies elsewhere that we hope to roll this approach out. And the first approach is to reduce demand through energy efficiency, through load reduction, through structural shift, and then minimize the emissions that come from the required energy, from the remaining required energy. So the shift that we're really describing here, it cuts 56% of China's required anticipated energy needs in 2050. And it really is revolutionary. And just to put that in context, my colleague John Kreitz made an interesting comparison I want to share. And that's that during the Industrial Revolution, we increased labor productivity 10-fold over the course of about 120 years. This shift, this transition that we're describing, increases energy productivity 7-fold and carbon productivity 10-fold, and does so in about 35 years. So this really is the stuff of revolution. It's an accelerated and transformative pathway for China. So doing just a quick sort of zoom in on where we found these opportunities. Chip mentioned today's about solutions, so I wanted just to highlight for you guys one example out of each of the sectors that we found. And you see here sort of the relative contribution of each of the 3 demand sectors on our overall results. So industry is the largest driver of energy and emissions in China. It's responsible for about 65, more or less, % of China's energy consumption. And we found really significant savings opportunities in a shift to higher quality materials. So higher quality materials typically mean that you'll need less of them, and so it really is a quality over quantity equation here, and especially cement and steel, of which China is the world's leading producer of both. One of the case studies we looked at was the World Trade Center, One World Trade Center in New York, and they pioneered some new cement chemistry there that required 40% less cement for the building than it would have otherwise by increasing the compressive strength of the cement. So therefore, 40% savings on cement and also all the attendant energy and emissions that goes along with saving that cement. China is looking to double, they're on track to double their commercial building floor space between now and 2050. And if they were able to use these higher quality materials, they would avoid using the cumulative amount of cement that has ever been used in Germany and England, the two largest economies in Europe. So it just shows, just through the adjustment of a single technology, the amount of savings that are available in China's commercial buildings. So if China's buildings were a country, they would be the third largest energy consumer in the world, behind only China and the United States. And like I mentioned, they're on a path to double their floor space here. So we looked at a case study in Qinhuangdao in the Hebei province, where they built 9 multifamily residential buildings to the German passive standard. These buildings require 65% less energy than the buildings that stand next to them. It allowed them to disconnect from the district heat system that is powered by both natural gas and by coal. But more importantly, their air quality, the indoor air quality in these buildings is 10 times better than in neighboring buildings. The buildings cost 10% more to build, but they commanded a 25% premium on the market because people care so much about environmental quality and air quality in the buildings. So these passive house standards are one of the other technologies in the building sector that we're looking to roll out. And in the transportation sector, one of the interesting things we found was that commercial freight is one of the main drivers of energy use, and that the logistics are pretty poorly optimized. My colleague Robbie here in the front spent a lot of time thinking about this, and one of the solutions that he and his team came up with was this idea of Uber for freight. So 40% of trucks in China are driving around empty, and that's about double the average rate in the United States and Europe. And they're driving empty because of bad coordination and because of a fragmented industry. So the idea is, like, imagine Uber for freight for trucks, where truck drivers could have location services on their phones. When they drop off a load, they can click in, and they would be suggested for neighboring loads, nearby loads, based on their equipment, what they're capable of hauling, whether they've just carried milk or chemicals, suited both matching the load, the equipment, and the location. And our estimates are that we could cut those 40% empty hauls in half, save all the associated emissions, the energy, the air pollution, and decongest cities in the process. So finally, the electricity sector. I know some people have heard that China, and in some cases it's true, in some cases it's been a little bit exaggerated, but that China's been bringing on a new coal-fired power plant weekly. That slowed down dramatically recently, but we've found actually through our analysis that China very well may or should have built its last coal plant yesterday. And we found this for a couple of different reasons. Interestingly, renewables, particularly wind and solar, are not cost competitive with coal yet in China. And we don't anticipate them to be cost competitive with coal till about 2025. So we've got this decade gap when we really don't want to lock into a bunch of fossil assets that we'd have to depreciate over the next 30 to 50 years. So what's the solution there? We've actually found that through demand reduction, through energy efficiency, and through delivering against China's existing renewable targets, they can bridge that gap, not using demand-side resources to wait until renewables are cost competitive, and then in 2025, as new generation becomes necessary, they can choose the least cost option, and by that point it will be solar and wind. So that's a little overview of the 4 sectors that we looked at. So importantly, this Reinventing Fire approach has been designed to, and by coincidence, has aligned with a lot of the government's top priorities. Reinventing Fire reduces carbon and non-carbon emissions substantially, dropping sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide levels 90% by 2050, returning them to levels not seen since 1980. The strategies reduce a dependence on oil and stem the growth of natural gas, causing demand for each fuel to peak in 2030 and 2045 respectively. And this has significant benefits in China's national security and in their energy security. So Reinventing Fire is consistent with the China dream that was crafted to support the delivery of its centenary goals, the doubling of GDP by 2021 and the realization of a moderately developed society by 1949, and by 2049. And those are the top-level messages that China's government is, top-level goals that China's government's driving towards. So employing all these strategies dramatically peaks the 3 peaks associated with China's energy that a lot of people are looking at here leading into Paris, and that's coal, carbon, and primary energy. So it decreases their magnitudes by about 40% and pulls the peak forward in time by anywhere between 10 and 18 years, depending on the peak. And interestingly, our results are consistent with President Xi's commitment as of November last year, and then again announced in their INDC recently, to peak carbon by or before 2030 and to realize a 20% share of non-emitting sources of primary energy by 2030. So in closing here, I just wanted to share a couple of high-level observations on what it'll take to capture the opportunity that we've outlined. It's by no means inevitable, but what we've aimed to do is show that it is indeed possible. So the country's leadership has provided strong direction framing China's development pathway. GDP growth imperatives still exist, but they have to be balanced against environmental and social benefits. Recognizing the investment opportunity that exists to stimulate long-term economic growth is a critical point here. China's 11th and 12th five-year plans made significant progress on energy efficiency, but there's a ton more to do. And driving efficiency capture through further regulatory and market-based mechanisms can help tap that full potential, making the shift to clean energy more affordable. So our analysis showed that China can solve its environmental challenges with off-the-shelf technologies, and the issue is really around deployment and integration. Working more broadly to disseminate our known solutions is going to be critical. Amory here pioneered some of the ideas around integrative design, and integrative design in China is one of the topics they're most excited about, and it can make all of these solutions more affordable by making sure that any investment they make in energy is designed for multiple benefits from those single expenditures. And finally, engaging the market can really speed the emergence of new solutions that we haven't yet identified. Reforming institutions to support market-led innovation, including regulation and standards, business models, and management systems, will accelerate the capture of the opportunity that I just described. So to summarize our findings, China can achieve its goals for economic development, solve its current environmental challenges, and do so profitably. Reinventing Fire is a roadmap to do so, and thank you all so much for your kind attention this morning.